Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. I am ManyNinjas. As you can see, we're having a bit of another little short episode. Well, short, relatively speaking. Having some more fun with Dragon Ball Z Battle of Z on the PlayStation 3 in this instance. I decided to pick up the full version of the game after playing with the demo quite a bit. I rather enjoyed it. Reminded me a lot of the old-fashioned Dragon Ball Z Legends game, with a few other twists. And while I was playing, I noticed this particular bonus mission they tossed in there, where, for shits and giggles basically, I decided to play with a team entirely of Yamchas versus their most hated enemy, Saibaman. Even in the game, they're self-aware of exactly how much hatred Yamcha must have for these generic enemies. Although, considering how often they reuse Saibaman through all the bonus missions and various other missions in this game, I can kind of understand the Saibaman hate. Anywho, the basic premise of this mission is that with your squad of entirely selected people, you can pick whoever you want for this mission, you fight a bunch of Saibaman. A ridiculous amount of Saibaman, in fact, 100, give or take, of escalating difficulty, with two bonus ones, or I should really say one bonus gold one that will be appearing later on in the mission, where you get extra points if you manage to beat it before it runs away, and then the boss version of the Saibaman, which is a black one. In case you don't know how that particular color convention works in a lot of other games, when you get to a point when you face something that is just a general mook, and then suddenly you come across a black version of it, or some kind of alternate color that's kind of out there, that means they are the most lethal thing you could possibly come across. And the black Saibaman is no different. For those more familiar with the Square Enix series of Secret of Mana, or Legend of Mana, as it went later on, otherwise known as the second Densetsu series, think of the black Saibaman as the equivalent in this game of the Black Rabbite. If you happen to know what I mean, that means you're in for a lot of trouble unless you happen to equip your characters rather well before this fight began. In a way, though, this particular mission can kind of be considered a kind of a summary of some of the excess spare missions that you'll be finding within the course of this game, outside of the regular story mode games or the bad guys view of it for certain other side missions. Anything that is considered basically an extra mission will have you facing off against whoever you're supposed to be kind of facing against, plus a bunch of generic foes. Often, more than not, they toss in just some generic Saibaman in order to fill in the extra bits of that other team's roster. Which kind of makes it a bit silly, since you basically have some added distraction there, although I guess I suppose really it's to balance out the fact that at all times you have a team of 4 people against what could be maybe 1 or 2 foes otherwise. Going on to a bit of summary on the pros and cons of this particular title for anyone who's kind of wondering how it really is once you get to the final version. Well, the pros, as previously mentioned, this is probably the closest thing for anyone familiar with older Dragon Ball Z games, particularly from the PlayStation era. This is the closest thing we've probably seen in a good long while to Dragon Ball Z Legends, which much like this was a multi-team effort, or a multiple character team effort for the most part, where you can kind of select who you want and have everyone kind of fighting in a group melee format. But of course that also means it technically suffers a bit on the same part, because you can't have something or any character that has too many extra moves over another, because everyone has to have a generally similar move count in order to fit in this control scheme. The other problem is, for single player format, for a lot of the missions here, you're going to have some padding. This mission is clearly a padded mission, as are some of the other missions that will be popping later on, where you have who you were really interested in fighting, plus some Cybermen or some generic Frieza soldiers that just happen to be there, just to bump up the count a bit. Another thing which is, honestly, if you're used to the roster for other Dragon Ball Z games, especially in the just earlier or previous gen and current gen, so to speak, with PS3 games in the mix, the roster as they describe it on the actual case or when they're describing the game, is a bit misleading, and here's why. You go by what they describe there, they offer something along the lines of 70 plus characters. What they don't mention in that 70 plus characters is that for a lot of cases, the same character but separate transformation, otherwise known as basically the multiple forms of the Super Saiyans. If there's a certain kind of minor transformation, as like in Frieza's case, his 4 forms plus the full power form, each of these things are counted as a separate character. There is no mid-match transformation that goes on, at least for the players. In certain missions, yes, you'll have a character kind of pop out or quote-unquote transform, but they'll just load it in another character, which is what happens during the Frieza arc missions. But what this really means is for characters with a bunch of kind of in-between modes, you're going to have a lot of character slots dedicated to the multiple forms of a single character. So you have various counts of Goku, various counts of Gohan, both youth as well as his adult forms. Same thing with how Vegeta gets broken down. There are multiple slots for him, so on and so forth. For villains that transform, you'll have multiple slots for their transformations. So basically all of Frieza's slots basically take up 5 spots on their own. For the playable cooler slots, they have multiple things of their own. And as you can see, that really pads up, and that's how they got the high number of 70 plus that they might have been advertising. The next thing, which is more of a North American complaint at the moment, is just how they decided to handle a few of the DLC characters. Namely, Super Saiyan Bardock, Super Saiyan Vegeta, and well, actually, I can't exactly say anything about the Naruto-centric version of Goku, because that one is included within the actual case of the game itself. Basically, if you buy the game new, you get that one by default. If you want either the Super Saiyan version of Bardock or Vegeta, though, you had to have done a pre-order or buy day one at either an EV Games or GameStop or Best Buy. And while I imagine it will come to a later point where you can order or you can purchase it as DLC off of your related download service, either Xbox Live or PlayStation Network, right now that's not feasible, and at least they're claiming at the moment that there is no plans to do so. How long that lasts, I honestly don't know, and I honestly don't see it happening, but it kind of seems off for a character like Vegeta in Super Saiyan form, where it's actually established in the story that that's relegated to downloadable content. Whereas in this case, honestly, the Super Saiyan version of Bardock, which is kind of a what-if character, that one I could honestly accept without much questions. Alright, now to talk about a few of these specialty boss fights. Admittedly, it's kind of a mixed bag here, my own opinion here. The boss fights themselves are actually really enjoyable from what I've gone through so far. Which, just to disclose that, I've gone faced off in the Saiyan arc against Great Ape Vegeta as well as Great Ape Gohan in the villain's version of the fight from a different mission. And it's actually really enjoyable trying to fight off against Great Ape with pretty much 4 sorted fighters, and especially if you take the time to try to break it apart, pretty much limb by limb. But part of the problem is, much like other things that I've mentioned up to this point, they do reuse bits and pieces here a bit more than they honestly should have. Just to mention what's going on screen right now, Yamcha versus one of this game or one of this mission's special bonus features, trying to fight off against a gold Saibaman who's incredibly elusive and honestly harder to peg down than the black Saibaman. Although honestly, not as tough. Just runs away a lot. Alright, sorry, getting back to where I was. For the Great Ape bosses, while some of the characters, or some of the bosses, or those bosses have individual moves based on the character that's playing there, so basically, the Gohan version of the Great Ape is a bit more wild in how it fights there, while the Vegeta version has a few more kind of a finesse moves and bit more fighting tactic to it for a bit. And of course, the Bardock version, because you know there has to be a Bardock version, also has a few of its own tricks there. Generally, a lot of the Great Ape boss fights have a lot of similarities still. So, aside from maybe a trick or two, once you face one, you generally know what to look for at that point. It's just a matter of how much health has been assigned to that and who you happen to have working with you as part of your team. One of the other large boss fights would be the Mecha Cooler there, or the Mecha Cooler Core, I should really say there, which operates somewhat on a similar thing to my understanding, although they have at least a few more tricks or a few more special elements for that fight to help change it up a bit. But I'm afraid part of those boss counts are actually related to the 70 plus characters they were also describing, and you can't access or actually play as any of those things, so that kind of shows you some of the issues that we were having with the roster that I was talking about earlier. Just to kind of list this off regarding the roster, since it comes up quite a bit during this particular video alone. When you start the game, you effectively start with your Z fighters from the Saiyan saga, so basically everyone in kind of the most default forms. And as well as, since I completed the demo version of the game, I also happen to have Raditz and Saibaman already unlocked, because I completed those first few missions. And for the most part, you get the rest of the character roster as you progress through the missions there. All the normal main missions as well as the villain side missions will get you most of the roster there. Although there are some of the final transformations, you have to go through the Another Age version of the mission, or Another Age missions as a whole, to unlock some of the trickier ones. Honestly, that's not exactly anything new to a Dragon Ball Z style game. Honestly, there have been character unlocks based on story progression as far back as the PlayStation 1 games, and yeah, no, pretty much since the PlayStation 1 games as things go along there, and technically even further back if you count the RPG titles. So there's nothing new there at all. And honestly, if you go through the missions, those part during the single player mode, you'll get everyone fairly quickly there. Unless you're specifically going back to replay in order to get extra things like topping up the ranks and everything. Which I think it might apply for certain characters. I don't know off the top of my head. I'll have to confirm it later. But for most of the missions, it's not overly hard as long as you kind of pay attention to how you're playing to get at least a decent rank, like an S rank or double S, really. So you'll get most of the roster after a while of playing. Really depends on just how quickly you want to fast track through all the missions. Now you're probably wondering why I haven't brought up any of the online modes, since on top of the single player mode, which is pretty much all your missions there, you also have the multiplayer co-op mode, which is basically play along with a sort of people online in order to complete through the regular missions, and of course the versus mode, which is at this point a staple part of any Dragon Ball Z game. And the only reason I can't say too much about that is because I honestly just haven't gotten the chance in order to log into any of the online co-op or versus things, just to kind of a lack of time. If anything, I'll probably be trying the online co-op mode just to see how that works, because I honestly am a little hard pressed to think of the last time I can think of Dragon Ball Z game that had a co-op mode to go through the regular single player experience. The versus mode, that's actually kind of standard fare at this point, so it really is just a matter of how many people can log in at once, which I imagine is hypothetically should be something like one for every character. Let me double check. Yeah, network players 2 to 8, so you could have every character available played by an actual person online. So that part is honestly not surprising at all. Now, how the single player thing works with co-op, that's the thing that interests me, just because I haven't seen it before. Hopefully I'll be able to come back later with a video showing exactly how that works off once I get a chance, and hopefully talk to a few people who have the game once I figure out exactly who also picked it up. in terms of how this game handles character customization, at the end of every mission that you complete, you unlock a number of item cards which allow you to pretty much add special effects to any character that you add them on, mostly in the form of increasing some kind of statistic by a certain amount of points. For the most part, they're, for the lower levels, are actually pretty low, like plus 10, 25, 30 to whatever related stat there. Although there are a few other cards which basically do a little more interesting effects, like amplify the amount of experience that you get, increase the level of your partner, which helps them kind of become a little more efficient as it goes on there. Increase the number of retries in some cases seen. Make it. I know there's a version of the Master Roshi and Master Shen cards, which on each one, Roshi's version of the card makes it so that if you're fighting on the ground, you actually do more damage, but if you fight in the air, you do less. While the Shen version does the opposite, with more damage in the air while less damage on the ground, and so on and so forth there. Now, while it might seem that a few of the things are a little too small at first in order to do much, it's once you start combining the things for the most part, that'll end up really helping, especially as you get on the later missions where your opponents start getting a little more tricky, can do honestly more damage, and will just generally kind of pound you quite a bit if you don't have a properly equipped character at the time. And as well as doing the same thing to your partners, so you also want to make sure that you're not just topping up the character you're playing as, because if your partners die out, then their retries are taken from the same pool of yours, and if it throws 0, you lose the mission as a whole. So, realistically, you want to get enough cards that you have a chance to really power up the team you're using at a time, and customization therefore kind of becomes a very important aspect for this game. Last note on the customization front is the fact that, yes, you can customize all of the characters' colors. Which, honestly, if you think about it, really, it's kind of a standard fare thing for most fighting games at this point, which I would still kind of count this within the realm of. But it's still honestly nice to see within the game as a whole. In terms of how many different sets of special or custom colors you're going to have 3 custom sets of colors on top of the 4 default ones that you can have for each character. Alright. Some final thoughts for the moment, now that I've been able to play both the demo and now I've been able to sink some time in playing the full retail version on PlayStation 3. In terms of how the demo honestly prepares you for the full version, I'd have to say in terms of the actual gameplay itself, it's a fairly good representation of what to expect when you actually go into the full game. In terms of the missions, I'd honestly have to say there might be a few too many padding kind of missions for the most part. It looks like they're just trying to artificially lengthen the time of the game there. The roster could have used some variety, although I'd have to say generally the characters at least play different enough for the multiple versions of the same person to make it interesting. And I can't comment yet about the online experience just because I haven't tried it yet. For who I'd recommend this game to, if you happen to enjoy Dragon Ball Z games as a whole, and particularly like the Legends game from the PS1 era, I could definitely recommend this game because honestly that's the first attempt in that kind of a style of game in a good long while. If you're looking for a more in-depth fighting game, this is not the game for you this time around. I'd suggest waiting till the next burst limit or another Budokai. And even then, you want to research that one first. Because this one's a little too linear in terms of the actual fighting itself in order to really go as a good core fighter, I'd say. Overall, I'd still kind of recommend the title there. Maybe next time I'll show off some great ape footage. That's my time for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all later.